So let's talk about worldviews. The religious love to because they assume that absolutely everybody is just like they are, emotional crutches and all. However, they're always wrong, but they just can't handle that reality, can they? They seem to have a problem with that, if you notice. So here we go again with another attempt, and it's going to go about as well as you'd expect. Probably worse, in fact. As is no surprise, Daniel King, he's not doing so hot, is he? I trust nobody was expecting otherwise, because, this is apologetics. Like all apologists, he's relying on the fact that most people who watch his videos already believe all of the things that he's saying. Therefore, he doesn't have to actually justify anything. And that's a good thing because he can't. None of them can. So let's take a look at another of his supposed proofs that God is real and see why none of it is at all impressive.
What is a worldview?
Let me jump in here before you make a complete fool of yourself. I mean, you're going to do that anyhow, but I get to say my bit first before you get down to business. So let's just define our terms here. A worldview is a particular philosophy of life or conception of the world. I like to describe it as a belief system that overlays reality because it's a lot easier to run things through your ideological filter than to just deal with things as they actually seem to be. Now, I'm willing to bet he isn't going to agree with that, but that's what I'm going to go with. My video, my rules. This is just another place where the religious try to push their own beliefs on everybody else because they can't imagine that everybody isn't just like they are, even though they're almost always completely wrong. But sure, why don't you tell us what you think it is? Then try to justify it, because this ought to be good.
Everyone has a worldview or a belief system. A worldview is a set of presuppositions that may be true, partially true, or could be entirely false, which we hold about the makeup of the world.
And guess what yours is? Of course, he won't acknowledge that because his is based on fifis and not at all on a rational evaluation of reality. That's really kind of the point though, isn't it? If he was going with the best available evidence that we had, something that we could all see and study and test, then he wouldn't need that overlay, would he? It's why I don't need a worldview at all. I just go where the real world seems to point me. Now, sure, there are some things that we have to presume because we don't really have a choice. You can't solve the problem of hard solipsism after all. But any presumption that I make, it's based on the best available evidence that we have at the time, unlike him, which is based on wishful thinking and childish emotions. I'm already getting a strong vibe that he's going to try to pretend that everybody else is just like him, and then he'll strawman everything that everyone else does without actually supporting his own side. Let's see if I'm right.
Proof. God is real. According to one Christian teacher, a worldview should answer 4 important questions. First, it should answer the question of origin. Where did I come from?
Who cares? First off, let's get back to the beginning. Why should I care about so-called Christian teachers? I care about truth based on objective facts and available evidence. The question of where did I come from is very simple. My parents had sex. Problem solved. Of course, that's not emotionally comforting enough for people like King, so they try to make themselves seem special, even though they're clearly not. But since I already have a perfectly satisfying and evidence-based answer for that, I don't need it as part of my non-existent worldview. In fact, I really can't imagine why anyone ever would.
Second, your worldview should answer the question of meaning. What is the meaning of life?
Who says there is one? Because this is just a presumption on the part of emotionally frail children who desperately want meaning. They want purpose. That doesn't mean that any actually exists. This is really where the idea of worldviews becomes pointless once again. I'm only looking for truth. I want facts upon which I can form well-evidenced, well-reasoned conclusions about what is actually going on. And they may not be accurate 100% of the time. We can only work with what we know at the time. Tomorrow, we might learn more, and we'll have to revise our views. He doesn't, because he doesn't care. He just wants to be happy, and of course he wants to fleece people. Because what the hell else is new?
Third, your worldview should answer the question of morality. What is right and what is wrong?
You don't need a worldview for that. You have a society in which you live. Because here's the thing, right and wrong, they are entirely subjective. There is absolutely no evidence of anything else going on. This is why evidence matters and your childish fifis don't. They are presuming, his word remember, that there is a magical set of objective morals set about by his imaginary friend in the sky because he wants it to be there. Well, who says it's real? This is what happens when you smuggle your pre-existing theology into absolutely everything that you do. That's not a worldview, that's confirmation bias. I trust nobody is surprised one bit.
And fourth, your worldview should answer the question of destiny. Where am I going after I die?
Into the ground, just like you. Again, zero evidence for anything else. I mean, you might wind up on the mantle in a jar, but that's really just a personal choice. Myself, I don't care, just throw me in a ditch. It doesn't really matter. I'm not here anymore, so I don't care what you do. And no, I didn't go to heaven or hell, I simply ceased to be, just like King here will, no matter what ludicrous beliefs he has. This is where you have so many problems. He's working on wishes and dreams and fanciful thinking, and not remotely on observations of reality. Because he doesn't really care about reality, does he? He just wants his overactive ego stroked.
There are many different worldviews or philosophies that influence people's thoughts and their behaviors. Some people are liberals, others are conservatives, some people are Christian, others are atheists, some choose to follow Muhammad, others follow the teachings of Buddha, some are vegetarians, others eat meat. In any given philosophy of life, it is important to interpret facts consistently across an entire system of belief.
Maybe. I mean, consistency is great depending on what you're consistent with. I try to be consistent with reality. The world is what the world is, no matter how much I like the idea or not. I honestly don't matter, and neither does Daniel King. He just desperately wants to be important, even though he demonstrably isn't. Approximately 385,000 people are born every single day, and about 166,000 die. The vast majority of those people will never be remembered long term, because they don't matter. Sure, they might have people who will miss them right now, but in the grand scheme of things, they're nobody. In 1,000 years, nobody will ever know that I was alive, and they won't know that Daniel King was ever here either. It doesn't matter how that information might make you feel. It's just the simple truth. Learn to deal with it, pal. Learn to deal with it.
Each person looks at the world through a particular paradigm. The paradigm through which you see life is like a pair of tinted glasses that colors everything you see.
And some paradigms are more realistic than others. This is one thing that he will never, ever, ever bring up. It's not a matter of what kind of crazy crap you can make up in your head. It's how likely it is that said crazy crap is actually true. It's all in how you look at information. One person who says, "I don't like the idea that people die of cancer," doesn't really mean anything. People still do. What you like doesn't matter. It's how close your beliefs get to demonstrable reality that does. And the religious are really, really bad at that because they really don't care. This isn't about comporting accurately with the demonstrable facts. It's about stroking their own egos and getting that dopamine shot in the noggin that they are so desperately after. Just because you say, everybody has a paradigm. That doesn't make all paradigms equal. You are just dumb.
If you wear a pair of green-colored sunglasses, everything you look at becomes green. Every person develops a life paradigm or lenses through which he or she interprets life, arguments, and experiential evidence. The more studious the person, the better his life philosophy will be articulated. The more creative a person, the better her life philosophy will be seen as something new and worthy of attention in the world at large. The more honest the person, the more he will try to live consistent with his own paradigm.
No. The more honest, the more that said person will try to develop a paradigm that correlates with objective reality. The more honest you are, the less you're going to try to impose your own emotional state on the real world around you. This is where the religious start to run into trouble because they aren't at all interested in consistency. They just want pleasure. They are looking for emotional comfort, whether it makes any rational sense or not. That's a problem, whether you can come to grips with it or not. This is exactly why people like King are wrong so often, because they've adopted an entirely indefensible belief system designed to make them happy, instead of simply opening their eyes to what's actually going on without broad brushing their emotional hang-ups all over it. And then they think everybody else is doing something wrong. Maybe you need to stop standing in front of that mirror, because it's just making you look like a moron.
Most people do not create a life philosophy from nothing. Instead, they borrow thoughts and ideas from lots of other people.
Oh, get indoctrinated into absurd ideas from their parents. Because I will agree that most people never actually examine their own paradigms and use reality as a yardstick against which it must be measured. Religion is based on fear. Fear of gods, fear of death, fear of the unknown, usually even fear of themselves. They would much rather live in an imaginary happy land in their heads than to simply deal with what's actually going on. Because, by and large, they don't care what's actually going on. That's scary, and they're terrified to simply deal with it. That's kind of sad, isn't it?
So who you choose to believe determines how you live your life. For example, if you read the books of a certain author, you begin to wear the sunglasses that author is wearing, and the way you see and interpret the world is influenced by that author's paradigm. The true disciple adopts his mentor's sunglasses.
Which is why hero worship is so ultimately damaging. I've said that one for years. Don't have heroes. Don't pay attention to people. Pay attention to ideas, and then take those ideas and process them for yourself. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Test it for yourself if you can. The bigger the claims, the more important it is to find out if it's actually true. Set a standard for yourself and apply it evenly to absolutely everything. Make sure that standard is rational and based on objectively demonstrable evidence. That's one of many, many places where the religious fail utterly.
There are as many paradigms as there are people. Some paradigms can be dismissed easily. Others are clearly copies of another person's paradigm. But occasionally you run across an original paradigm that helps you understand the world in a clearer way or in a different way.
But that doesn't make it a true way. Just because it might appeal to you on an emotional level, that doesn't make it worthwhile. It's one reason why religion says we're different. But that doesn't make you right. Just being different doesn't prove anything. In fact, it's probably a pretty good indicator that you're wrong, given that everybody else disagrees with you. It's one thing if you can come to the table with evidence to support your claims, but most of them never can. It's just poorly constructed arguments based on wishful thinking and empty claims and laughable threats that have zero supporting corroboration at all. I don't know why you think that impresses anybody, because it really doesn't.
Every legitimate paradigm that is clearly communicated on a broad enough platform eventually becomes common knowledge, and everyone accepts that paradigm as truth.
So let me get this straight. You don't think creationists exist? You don't think that flat earthers exist? That would be nice, but it's demonstrably not true. Just because things become common knowledge and commonly accepted, that doesn't mean that everybody buys into them. In fact, mostly people on the woo-woo side, they actively ignore reality when it comes into conflict with their own ridiculous beliefs. Because, as I keep saying, they don't actually care what's true. People like Daniel are blinded by their biases, programmed into their heads by their beliefs. These are people who see God everywhere, just like UFO nuts see flying saucers everywhere. Sometimes a light in the sky is just that.
Future generations build on that revelation with their own creative ideas, often working overtime to plug up all the holes in any given paradigm with a newly modified paradigm.
He's describing religion. He knows that, right? Because this is where religion goes absolutely wrong. They start with an ancient set of mythological beliefs, like, say, that Jesus rose from the dead, and then they are convinced for entirely emotional reasons that it just has to be true. They set about filling in all of the gaping holes with ad hoc explanations that aren't borne out with any actual evidence. If they can invent something out of whole cloth that seems to do the job, then hey, it must be true, right? Why? Because they say so. But saying so doesn't actually make it so. How do they know these things, and how have they put any of it to the test to see if they stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny? And the answer is they don't, because they don't care. They're just looking for comfort.
Unfortunately, every paradigm is incomplete and has holes, but all paradigms hold truth as well.
And how exactly do you know that? From a Christian perspective, does the Hindu paradigm hold any truth at all? If you can jump through some hoops and reinterpret Hinduism to fit in with your own ideas, does that somehow make it true? Because that's simply not rational at all. This isn't what do you believe, it's how do you know, and knowledge requires some rational basis in fact. Got any of that? I didn't think so.
Each person views life through his or her own colored sunglasses. Many people will go through multiple paradigms over the course of their lives. Each new idea corrects the holes in a previous paradigm. The truth is that no one paradigm is completely accurate or internally consistent with itself or externally consistent with experiential evidence.
Well, there's your claim that you're not going to apply to your own beliefs, I'm sure, because they never do. The simple reality is that if you care at all about the facts, you'll take as many ideas as you can and match them up with the real world and alter your own views for anything that doesn't fit. Your feelings simply do not matter. They never have, and they never will. This is why the religious are such a mess when it comes to having coherent, rational conversations, because they are not remotely interested in what reality actually looks like, only what their wishes and dreams wish it would look like, and that's a terrible way to go through life, isn't it?
Now, Paul talked about this when he said, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known." 1 Corinthians 13:12.
But there you go, caring about what it says in an ancient book of mythology. Even though most scholars think Paul, or whoever was claiming to be Paul, wrote 1 Corinthians, that doesn't make anything in there objectively true. Remember, we're looking for truth, not feelings. Just because it appeals to you on a personal level, that doesn't actually mean anything. This isn't proof, and the simple fact is, that's why he's not making these videos for skeptics. He's making them for people who already believe, and aren't likely to ask any difficult questions that King wouldn't be able to provide a decent answer to. That's why they rely on faith, not demonstrable fact. Because they don't really give a damn.
Your paradigm, or the glasses you are wearing, or your worldview determines what you see.
But it doesn't determine what is true. This is why the second theists start talking about worldviews, they've lost. Your feelings don't dictate reality. Reality is all that actually matters. It's what's going on in the real world beyond your skull. And that's great for rational people, but the religious aren't rational. They're just trying to make it to emotional comfort, and if they have to believe a head full of absurd nonsense to get there, that's what they'll do.
To understand how this works, let's compare the Christian viewpoint with the worldview of an atheist.
No actual atheists were consulted in the making of this video. He doesn't know, and he doesn't care. That's why they're not talking to us. It's why they're hiding in their childish safe spaces, pretending that everybody else believes all the things that they do, because they can't handle the potential hardships if they actually had to produce evidence for anything at all. So this ought to be a hoot. Go right ahead, Daniel. Make a complete fool of yourself.
The difference between the Christian and the atheist is that each one has a different paradigm through which he or she interprets life. Because I believe in the Bible, I see everything through a pair of Christian glasses.
And the standard questions here apply. Why in the world would you believe in the Bible? And that goes for all theists equally. Why would anybody believe in the Quran, or the Vedas, or the Enuma Elish, or anything else? Why would anyone believe in a book that you haven't checked out for yourself and gone looking for corroboratory evidence for? Because that's how smart people operate. You don't start with the presumption that the Bible is true because you really like the idea. You go to reality, you take the claims made in the Bible, and you see if they can be validated with actual evidence in the real world. And the fact is, most things in the Bible can't be. They just can't. Therefore, a rational person wouldn't believe any of it, at least not the parts that they couldn't verify, because it's not justifiably true. What you wish doesn't matter. This really can't be that hard to figure out.
But the atheist sees everything through a pair of atheist-tinted glasses. Because we have different sets of glasses on, we can look at the exact same evidence and come to two totally different conclusions.
Sure, one is based on evidence and one is based on feelings. Feelings don't matter. I don't care how emotionally attached you are to your beliefs. That doesn't actually mean anything. It's why the religious need a double standard. They get a free pass with their beliefs and nobody else does. Christians are right and Hindus are wrong. Muslims are right and Buddhists are wrong. They're all doing the exact same thing, and we've examined that in detail many times before. But it's all a childish emotional reaction that dictates their faith. There's no way to describe it but stupid.
For example, I see God everywhere. The atheist sees God nowhere.
That's because we're looking for evidence and you're looking for comfort. We care about the truth. You care only about being happy. One is rational and one is not. And that's what this really comes down to. You care about what you want to be true. We care about what is actually true. This is a problem for a lot of groups. Lots of people take positions based on their emotions, not based on the evidence. They don't care about the evidence, they just want to feel good. And that's just dumb. Maybe you ought to knock that off.
Let me tell you a story. Once there was a philosophy professor who wrote on his chalkboard the topic of his lecture, God is nowhere. The atheist students in the classroom might read that phrase as God is nowhere, but a Christian student raised his hand and said, Amen. And he read it as God is now here.
Then there's something severely wrong with the Christian student. Clearly, there was no space in the original statement. Of course, crap like this is a favorite for idiot apologists like King. All kinds of things that never happened told as parables to people who were desperately looking for comfort. Then the dumbass Christians in the audience think that because somebody said it, it's gotta be true. It's no wonder that they fall for the absurd crap in the Bible, right? So this isn't impressive or meaningful in the first place. But even worse when you realize that the Christians are dumb enough to fall for it. How sad, right?
The glasses we wear determine what we see. The presuppositions that one brings to the discussion determines how one interprets evidence for God's existence. I see creation and think of a creator. The atheist peers through his evolutionary glasses and sees random chance.
No, we're looking at the evidence. He keeps going over the same ground and making the same mistakes. Now, granted, he can't hear my criticisms. That's one of the downsides of doing the response video format, but surely somebody must have pointed this out to him in the past. He's got to understand that he's doing it all wrong. I just suspect that he doesn't actually care. None of them ever do. They just want things to be so because it gives them the emotional high that they're looking for, and whether or not any of it is actually true, that doesn't matter, right? But it does. And that's what makes them so dumb, because they can't figure out the truth.
I see a miracle, but an atheist might witness the same event and remain skeptical. The problem is that we're wearing different colored glasses. It does little good for me to try to convince the atheist the world is tinted green when he feels he can clearly see that it is tinted red. The atheist and I could spend all day arguing about the evidence, but at the end of the day, we'll both be frustrated with the other because we both interpret the evidence differently.
Yes, we're interpreting it rationally, and you, sadly, are not. You're incapable of seeing all the places that you're just wrong because you are fundamentally at odds with the real world. I agree that interpretation is a major part of the problem, and that's why you don't needlessly multiply absurdities. It's why his idea of worldviews is an impediment to actually coming to realistic conclusions. He's looking for comfort, not facts. We're looking for facts based on the best available data that we can find. His worldview is getting in the way of his ability to see the real world, and apparently that makes him happy. I'm not sure how this becomes proof of God, because it's really just trying to justify your own personal delusions. How do you have an intelligent conversation with someone who says, I'm right because I want to be right? He's just proving what an uncritical dumbass he is.
No matter what supposed inconsistencies or inaccuracies that the atheist might point to in the Bible, or he might talk about his life experience, I can come up with a good theological explanation to explain away the atheist's arguments.
So, you actually do know what you're doing wrong. That's kind of disturbing, because explaining away is not the same thing as having a rational explanation. He's starting with an emotionally comforting conclusion and then figuring that if he can just make something up that sounds good to him, he's solved all possible objections to his claims. That's how 6-year-olds act, isn't it? Kids don't realize that they actually need to justify their actions rationally. Instead, they just make things up. And that's exactly what Daniel is doing. Pathetic, isn't it?
Of course, he won't accept my arguments because he's looking at them through a different colored pair of glasses. For example, no matter how many arguments he throws at me that says morality comes from an evolutionary basis or that belief in God is simply a gene, it will do no good. If the atheist rejects the concept of God, then he's forced to look for another explanation for what he sees in the world.
Yeah, no. Because we're actually looking at the world and getting our answers there. People like Daniel, they're looking inward at their own feelings and then trying to project those feelings out onto reality. And that's not how anything actually works. If this is supposed to be part of his Proof for God series, all he's doing is showing where he and people like him are going completely wrong. Your proof for God has to come from outside, not from within. It has to come from what you can demonstrate to be true, not what you wish was true. And this is why they just make a complete fool of themselves. They have absolutely no clue what's actually going on in the real world, nor do they care. You don't just get to pick something arbitrarily that appeals to you and declare it true. You actually have to work for it, and he can't do that, can he? This doesn't bode well for the rest of his proofs for God. But we'll look at one or two more just to see how bad he actually gets. Thereafter, he goes on for a little while longer, given the same kind of examples and proving he doesn't have the slightest clue, so I figured we're just going to cut it there. This is long enough already. If you want to see the rest of his video, the link is in the description as always. I don't know why you would, but by all means, go ahead. This is obviously not the first time that we've seen discussions on worldviews, but it's usually not this blatant. He never addresses which worldview is correct and how he actually knows that, mostly because he doesn't care. This is why methodology matters, and being able to step out of your own head and actually evaluate ideas independently, but the religious don't do that. It's all mindless fifis wrapped up in a bow because they just want things to be so, even if they can't demonstrate that they actually are. This is why people like Daniel King look like such idiots. He went through the entire video not wondering for a second if he was actually correct in his assertions. Because he's not interested. He just wants to be happy, like an immature little child throwing a temper tantrum because he's not getting his way. That's religion for you, folks. I trust that nobody here is surprised.